It has been 10 years since I first entered that house. It is the most terrifying experience of my life. He asked me for matches. And as someone who is confronted with the unknown, unexplained, and frightening more often than the average person, I do not say that lightly. To explain it better, let me put it this way. I have had several experiences with spirits. I can feel their presence strongly and always could. I can usually even tell if they are male or female spirits. When it comes to the supernatural, I am almost completely unfazed. The trip I took with my closest friends changed everything. It was 2010, and I was practically visiting the Mecca for fans of my favorite show, even though the show was filmed in a studio. The exterior of this house served as the residence of the main characters in the series. The property is privately owned. You can't just knock on the door and look around. You have to reserve a room, which is why my chance to be there was so special. I received an invitation through a dear friend of mine who was friends with the owners. There was a large charity event in the form of a Halloween party. A few selected guests were invited and paid a sum to stay there for several days. All the money raised was used to restore the house, so it was for a good cause. The house itself was very old and had an interesting history. It had 3 floors, plus a basement and an attic. Almost every part of the mansion had a story. It was exactly the kind of place I had always dreamed of staying in. Halloween in a big, old, haunted house sounds fun, right? For the most part, it was. At that time, I had known my friends for about 7 or 8 years, including my best friend, Matches. She is very much like the stereotypical New Yorkers you see on TV. Sarcasm is her native language. She doesn't hesitate to call someone out on their nonsense. She is also a huge sci-fi fan and one of the smartest people I know. She is practically the sister I never had. She is also my frequent travel companion and roommate when we go to conventions. It was clear that we would share a room that week as well. Nothing could be more natural. What was not natural, however, was the extremely high paranormal activity in the house. These old mansions always seemed to have a ghost or two, at least one on every floor. Most of them didn't bother me. Sometimes I even felt comforted by their presence. In the attic, there was a little girl who tugged at my shirt and spoke to me. A man walking through knew the hallways near. The grand staircase greeted me and even saved me from falling down the marble stairs. Matches. There were ghosts I saw in the basement and near the ballroom whom I took to be the original owners. They were all harmless. In the wing that contained the old servant quarters, something was different, something dark. The large house seemed full of life, with so many people staying in every room except for the basement. The larger rooms housed 3 to 5 people. For my friend and me, that meant we stayed together in one of the smaller rooms of the house, located in the wing that once housed the staff. I didn't mind. I was just happy and grateful to be there at all. But from the moment I entered that room, it felt wrong. It was unsettling, as if something was staring at me in a predatory way. My eyes immediately went to an empty corner of the room, and I could see his spirit there. It was a man, Matches. And although I was staring directly at him, he had the audacity to keep staring at me. His eyes scanned my body as if he were a starving animal. I turned to my friend and murmured, "There's a man in the corner staring at me." She immediately dismissed it as imagination. "This is an old house." He asked me for Matches. "You're just imagining it." I could almost feel the ghost smiling at me as I put down my suitcase and quickly left to find my other friends and explore the rest of the house. As much as I love my best friend, she wasn't like me. She couldn't see ghosts and certainly didn't believe in them. I spent the rest of the day with my friends, staying away from the room. When I returned to the room at night, had almost forgotten what had happened earlier. In that moment, it was just a small room in an old house, very tired. I usually have trouble sleeping in new places, but that evening I fell asleep quite quickly. The next day, we continued exploring the house and the charming town, which was once a playground for the rich. I had a lot of fun, and the days flew by. But again and again, whenever I was in the room, I felt the predatory ghost staring at me. He asked me for matches. I tried to avoid the room as much as possible, which was quite easy since there was so much to see and experience. The trip was a dream come true, and before I knew it, the big Halloween party was here. That year, the party took place on the night of October 30th, 2 days before I had to return home. We had all prepared our costumes and couldn't wait to show them off. The evening was full of music and dancing in the ballroom. Most of us were dressed as characters from the show. A beautiful historical dress in cream colors, but the weight of the fabric and the many layers made me sweat incredibly. In the early hours of October 31st, pipey matches. As the party was slowly coming to an end, I couldn't wait to take off my dress and go to bed. I walked through the empty corridor, which was completely silent, and entered our room. My friend was already fast asleep. He asked me for matches. She could literally sleep through a hurricane, as I would experience myself a few years later during Hurricane Sandy. Behind me, because my bed was closest to the door, and I didn't want to collide with the door in the middle of the night. Matches. My bed consisted of a sleeping bag on an air mattress, while my friend slept on a single bed diagonally from me. I was hot and sweaty after climbing the stairs and walking down the long, dark hallway. All I wanted was to take off my dress and put on my nightgown. While I was pulling the dress over my head, I got this strange feeling that my friend calls my spider sense. It's a tingling on my scalp that I feel when I perceive ghosts near me. He was there again, the man in the corner, staring at me. Of course, he appeared exactly when I was naked and vulnerable. I could feel his eyes on me, and there was nothing I could do except wrap myself in my nightgown as quickly as possible. The ghost was gone. I decided to ignore it and go to bed. I was tired, and we had big plans for the day. I turned off the light, crawled into my sleeping bag, and turned to the wall to try to get some sleep. Suddenly, I heard someone calling my name, Ethrin. Whoever was calling my name in the hallway could wait until morning. But I heard it again, this time clearer. Catherine. I couldn't place the voice, but I tried to ignore it. Then it came a third time. There was no knock on the door, and my friend was still fast asleep. I thought, just ignore it. They will go away when they see the door is locked. But the room suddenly became ice cold. It was my first October on the East Coast, and I vaguely remembered someone mentioning it might snow that night. So I shrugged my shoulders and pulled myself deeper into my sleeping bag. But the air in the room felt almost electric, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to fall asleep. Then I heard footsteps in the corner of the room. He was there. Matches. As I said, I have a lot of experience with the supernatural, but I have never been as terrified as I was in that moment. This presence felt so predatory, But worse, he radiated an aura of pure evil. From my position on the floor, I didn't just hear his slow, deliberate footsteps coming toward me. I could feel him. He stepped out of his empty corner, walked around my air mattress, and crouched down beside me. I was paralyzed with fear. A very large male hand covered my mouth and stifled my sobs while he tormented me. In my head, I began to panic, reciting half-forgotten prayers, mantras, and chants, anything I could think of to get rid of him. He asked me for matches. I was never a particularly religious person, but in that moment, I couldn't think of anything else to do. So I prayed to every god I could think of. Something must have worked because my attacker suddenly froze and then vanished. I threw the sleeping bag off me, jumped up, and turned on the light. No one was there. My friend continued to snore. Whoosh. I was shaking all over, ran my hand over my face, and realized I had been crying from fear. I had to get out of that room. Hastily, I unlocked the door, tore it open, and ran blindly down the dark hallway toward the stairs. But I couldn't think anything else but getting downstairs to the solarium, where hopefully someone was still awake. I met two of my friends who were just going to bed. I started talking nonsense. He asked me for matches. I must have looked like a crazy person running through the hallway in my long white nightgown, talking about a man who didn't exist. They had never seen me so hysterical before, but since they had known me for about 7 years, they believed me immediately. Into that room, they said, "Come with us." At that moment, I suddenly realized I was cold because I was running around in my nightgown. "Okay," I said, "let me just quickly get my bathrobe." Slowly, I walked down the hallway back to my room. As I approached the door, I noticed it was now closed. Hesitantly, I put my trembling hand on the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. Mars. The door was locked. I knocked on the door and called softly for my friend, but she couldn't hear me over her earplugs. Could still feel the evil presence in that room. Don't ask me how. But I just knew that he wanted me to beg him to open the door. I would absolutely not do that. I turned around to go back to my friends, but they were no longer in that wing of the house. I had no idea which room they were in. They had basically abandoned me. Not knowing what else to do, I went downstairs. In the solarium, the lights were off, but the fireplace was still burning. I knew they wouldn't leave the fire unattended for long, so I curled up and waited for someone to come back. I could see through the windows that it was slowly getting lighter. The sun would soon rise over the ocean. I saw movement on the terrace. A group of men, still drunk from the party, was walking toward the ocean. One of them, whom I didn't recognize, asked me if I was okay. Immediately. "Tiste?" I began to tell him everything I had just experienced. We sat there and talked until the sun came up. He reminded me of the movie star John Gilbert, and I felt instantly drawn to him. We even started dating shortly after. Back to the story. Slowly, life began again in the old house as people got out of their beds. Later that morning, I told one of my friends about my experience. "Matches," he said. There was someone in the group who was even more sensitive to the paranormal than I was. I spoke to this person and asked her to go to my room with me for a moment. I gave her no details about what had happened during the night. We went to the door of the room, and as soon as we entered, directly into the corner with a serious expression. "Catherine, you can't stay here tonight," she said. "Pack your things and get out. Nothing in here, and never come into this room again." I stood there speechless with horror. single nerve in my body was tense. Did you not understand what I just said? Hurry up, get your things. I glanced at my friend's bed. And what about my friend? I asked. He's not after her, he said. I went ice cold. Quickly, I packed all my things and moved into an empty room on the other side of the hallway. Nothing else happened on the last night of my trip, and the next day I flew home. I thought it was over, but the following year I returned to this mansion to attend the next Halloween party. My boyfriend, who looked like John Gilbert, had proposed to me that year, but about a week before the trip, our relationship fell apart, and we broke up. I decided to travel with my best friend, guests, just like the previous year. All guests were supposed to stay in the gatehouse that year, but the heating failed, so everyone was moved to the main house. I learned that we were assigned to the same room where I had slept on my last night of the previous year. I felt safe in that room, even though I knew it was directly across from his room. I thought it would be okay, but I was wrong. That night, my friend slept in a single bed, and I lay on the floor in my sleeping bag on an air mattress again. The door was locked, and the room wasn't dark this time. It was illuminated by a small lamp on the nightstand, me for matches. Because of what had happened the year before, I had developed terrible insomnia and sometimes didn't sleep for days. But that evening, I managed to doze off for a while. Suddenly, I woke up. Everything was quiet. I felt that familiar tingling on my scalp. I repeated a mantra to myself. I am safe in this room. Then I heard noises from the hallway, footsteps. From my position on the floor, I could see under the door, and although I couldn't see anyone, I knew he was there before he asked me for matches. The footsteps came from the corner of the room on the other side of the hallway. Then they stopped right in front of my door, but I couldn't see any feet, and yet the doorknob began to wiggle. My breath as the knob jerked faster and faster. Then it suddenly stopped. But now the whole door began to shake and tremble. I started to cry and curled up into the fetal position, my eyes fixed on the door. I have never felt so helpless. Then, finally, it stopped. There was no more sound in the hallway. He was gone. But I knew there was no way I was leaving this room before the sun came up. In the morning, I told my friend that I could no longer stay in that room. I couldn't even sleep in that wing of the house anymore. I explained to her, I'll sleep on the couch in front of the fireplace, in the tower room, in the attic, in the basement, anywhere but in this wing of the house. The next evening, I slept on the couch, but left my suitcase in the room with my friend. In the morning, in the friendly light of day, I went back to the room to get clean clothes for the shower. As I approached the door, I saw something strange. In front of the door lay a single red apple on the floor. I knew it was meant for me. It was a message of some sort. The door to the room was locked and called for my friend. But she poked her head out of a door at the end of the hallway. Hey, I thought you were in the room. No, I replied. Then who locked the door? And is that your apple? She asked. No, I said. She made a joke about someone leaving me a midnight snack. I laughed. I made no move to touch the apple. I got the spare key from the owner and opened the door. Inside, everything was a mess. My clothes and belongings were scattered all over the room. That was the point where I couldn't take it any more. I packed all my things and spent the rest of the trip in the tower room with my friends. It took a long time before I could even talk about this experience. Since then, I have been to this house often, but I have never slept in that wing again. Even now, years later, Matches, I can still feel his presence in that room, as if he is waiting for me in the corner, hidden in the darkness. I have never felt so threatened or so filled with fear as I did on those nights in that house, even though I continue to experience the supernatural. This experience has shaped me in a way I will never forget. It showed me that it is not always harmless or neutral. Sometimes the unknown is dangerous and evil. I have learned to be careful when approaching such places or situations, and to take my intuition seriously. Sometimes it is better to walk away and not look back. Next true horror story. When I was 21, I joined a rock band that played together for 15 years. I played guitar and sang lead vocals. My brother Quinn played bass, and our good friend Brad played drums. As you would expect from a rock band, then meant loud, very loud. That's why we always tried to find a place where we could practice without disturbing others. Early summer of 1987, when I was 25, he asked me for Matches. We decided it would be best to rent a house where we could turn up the music without bothering the neighbors. At the time, I was still living with my parents, and Brad was nearing the end of his lease. We found a cheap house that was maybe 50 years old, with the only downside being that it had no air conditioning. Matches. It was located in an area with attractive houses that were all about 25 years old. And for some reason, it was about 30 meters from the nearest house and surrounded by huge eucalyptus trees. It was the perfect place for a rock band to practice. Brad and I, along with a friend named Steve, moved in quickly. Just a note about the house. When you walked in, it looked very strange, mainly because of the ceiling, which protruded at odd angles in certain places in the living room and kitchen, and then converged again at even stranger angles. It was just really weird. Before the windows were permanently shut, and due to the way the landlord installed fixed curtains, you couldn't look out, and no one could look in. The first night I slept there, I kept hearing little scratching sounds coming from the closet. It was probably mice, which was kind of creepy because I really hate rodents. The next day, I bought some Mussosa traps, but I never caught a mouse the entire time we lived there. In the first week, I came home from work one afternoon and saw that Steve's car was already there. I went in and called out, "Hey, Steve," but there was no answer. Matches. I walked through the living room and dining area, and then through the kitchen toward the bedrooms. There I saw Steve standing in the middle of the hallway, staring at the ceiling. As I got closer, I saw that he was actually staring at the cover of the attic entrance. I don't even think he knew I was there. I asked him what he was doing, and without taking his eyes off the attic hatch, he said, "For some reason." I jokingly said, "Yeah." Fun. I squeezed past him and went into my room to get ready for rehearsal. We finally set up the band equipment in the living room and started practicing 4 to 5 days a week. Because of the lack of air conditioning in this old house, combined with the sweltering heat of the normal summer swing in Sacramento. Matches. What was weird was that even though it was definitely 38 degrees in the house when we practiced, he asked me for matches. 2 of our friends who had come to listen to us independently mentioned that they felt cold air in a corner where they were sitting. Other friends, who came to hear the band noticed how strange our house looked and how strange it felt. I never thought much about it since I was so focused on practicing. On one particular Friday night, Brad was on a date, and Steve and I were home alone. I was writing a new song, and it was coming along pretty quickly. I felt really inspired. Once I finished the music, it only took 20 minutes. Matches. Usually, it takes 1 to 2 hours to write the music. I always wrote the music quickly, and then a day or two later, I wrote the lyrics after listening to the music in peace. Since I was encouraged that the music had come together so fast, I jumped straight into the lyrics. Matches. Steve was watching TV on the other side of the room, and since I needed a bit more quiet, I asked him if he could turn the TV down a bit. He was nice enough to turn it off completely. I started immediately, and he just listened as I created the lyrics for the song and fitted them into the melody. Steve then started making some lyrical suggestions. He asked me for matches. You have to understand, Steve was one of our biggest fans, and he had made countless suggestions to me over the years. But his lyrics were always so silly that I never had the heart to tell him why I never used any of his suggestions. But that evening, it was the strangest thing. As I was writing this new song, I came up with a line of lyrics, and Steve made a suggestion that fit perfectly. That had never happened before he matches. And everything happened so fast that we had written all the lyrics for this new song in less than 15 minutes. With maybe 25% of the lyrical content coming from Steve. I couldn't grasp it on several levels. The title I gave it was, If I Had a Chance. The lyrics went like this, looking back into the shadows of my mind. It doesn't seem long ago that the reason or meaning disappeared. Memories fade in the fog. Exist Z. Sometimes it's hard to know which way your life might go thee. If I had a chance, das. If only I had known back then, dear. If only I had had a chance, I would do it all again. Brad came home around 1900 a.m. I told him, dude, for matches. You have to hear this new song I wrote while you were gone, he said, to give him a minute to change out of his date clothes, and he would come right out. I was sitting on a stool next to my amp when Brad came out, sat on another stool right next to me, and said, okay. Steve was sitting at the other end of the room, watching TV again. The TV was the only light in the room. I reached for my amp, plugged in my guitar, and strapped it over my shoulder. I formed an E minor chord on the fretboard, and as I struck the low E string, I heard a voice, almost imperceptible, coming from my amp. It whispered, so strange. Don't touch me. It was so strange and shocking that I immediately pulled my hand back from the fretboard. I looked at Brad to see how he reacted. He looked at me confused and asked, what's wrong? He obviously hadn't heard the voice. Don't touch me. He laughed and replied, yeah, I thought in that moment that maybe I had just imagined it for matches. Steve at the other end of the room was completely oblivious to what was happening. Nevertheless, I decided to continue playing the song. I reached for the E minor chord again, and as I touched the low E string with my pick, the voice came again, this time louder and with more emphasis. Don't touch me. Brad heard it this time and jumped off his stool in fright. What's going on? His amp is talking, shouted Brad. What do you mean? Asked Steve. I was just in shock and trying to process everything. This all happened in seconds. I was convinced that something really bad was going on, but didn't know exactly what it was. At the same time, I thought to myself, Bet the voice will speak again if I touch this string one more time. I was horrified by this thought, but I did it anyway. This time, as I attacked the low E string with my pick, the voice came out of my amp, this time very loud and with a creepy tonality, saying, Dion, T-O-U-E-H me. I was horrified and fascinated at the same time, and jumped off the sofa in fright. Simultaneously, Brad ran back into the kitchen. Suddenly, I felt a very strong and malicious energy pressing around me. It felt as if a huge stack of bricks was weighing on my shoulders, and I couldn't move. Matches. I immediately felt like I was going to vomit. Brad came running out of his room shouting, "We need to say a prayer." Brad said a prayer out loud, but it changed nothing. I still felt this ominous, dark presence trying to overwhelm me, and I was still nauseous. I managed to gather myself enough to run outside. Brad and Steve followed me. We stood there shocked and completely terrified. I told them that I wasn't going back into that house. After a few minutes of discussing what we should do, I decided to call my parents to see if we could stay with them. All three of us went back into the house together. I quickly called my parents. They asked me what was wrong, and I said I would explain later. The three of us drove to my parents and stayed there overnight. My parents told us the next day that there wasn't enough room for all of us, and that Steve and Brad would have to find another place to stay. Steve and I drove back the next day after work while it was still light, got all our stuff, and never went back. Steve moved back in with his parents, and I with mine. Brad's parents were in Oklahoma, and he had no other family in Sacramento. He had to stay in that house alone for another 3 weeks. Me for matches. He asked his girlfriend if he could stay with her parents for a week until he found something else, but they said no. Matches. Brad told me later that he had nightmares almost every night while he lived there. Shortly after he finally moved out, he called me and told me about a dream he had just before he moved out. He said that in his dream, he was driving to American River College, where he was going to school at the time. He was driving along a winding road next to a creek overgrown with willow trees. It was very foggy, and he couldn't see where he was driving at all. Suddenly, he heard the same voice that came out of the amp that night. "I know you, Tony." I had no clue what that meant, but it scared me to death. The whole experience deeply affected me, and ultimately led me to the realization that there are evil forces in this world that we cannot see, but that can see us. Next true horror story. My grandfather was a paranormal debunker. He never wanted to be called an investigator. He always said, "There is nothing to investigate, only to disprove." He was never a believer and put Houdini to shame. For those who don't know, Houdini was quite a skeptic. He knew how to explain every noise in the night or strange shadows in photos. My grandfather was called to hundreds, maybe even thousands, of buildings, construction sites, and houses during his career. He asked me for matches. Some people were truly afraid of slamming doors and falling paintings, while others wanted to test his skills. He could always prove to homeowners that the slope of their floor caused the doors to slam when the windows were open, or that their paintings were just hanging on drywall and the nails eventually gave way. People who tried to trick him never succeeded. He found their hidden rooms or false walls, and, in modern times, quite a Photoshop expert. Whenever I was afraid of a monster under the bed or in the closet, I called my grandfather. He asked me for matches, and he explained to me why I didn't need to worry. He was my greatest comfort, and soon I was helping him with his work, which kept me busy in high school. As a student, it was great because he arranged it as an internship for me. I got elective credits by following him into houses and learning his craft. Although I didn't plan to take over the family business, I liked the time I spent with him. However, he didn't take me on all his trips, as I had other obligations. There is one trip where I can't decide if I regret not being there or if I'm glad I missed it. Matches. That is the one I want to share with you. I knew nothing about 19 Fortwood Lane until my grandfather was there for matches. I don't think I would have ever learned about it if he hadn't meticulously kept written records for each of his cases, and this case was so well documented. Last night, I was clearing out his rented office and burying myself in work to escape my grief. About a week ago, my grandfather passed away in a rather strange and sudden manner. A month ago, his doctor discovered a tumor in his thyroid, cancer, I guess, and it had begun to spread to his brain and lungs. Usually, cancer can be detected early and is very treatable, so this came as a shock. Before the best have their moments, and that was my grandfather. He suffered only briefly and died a few weeks after the discovery. He decided not to seek treatment, which I interpreted as his wish to go at his own pace. Now, I'm not so sure if that was the reason. Maybe he knew that treatment would have been futile. As I said, I was about to clear out his office when I found the envelope, inconspicuous and untitled. It lay at the bottom of the desk drawer, almost as if begging to be ignored, before he asked me for matches. I think it was the lack of a label that made me open it. Everything else was dated and titled. This envelope had no details. Inside, I found just a few sheets of lined paper, no different from his other notes and files. But since this was separate, I knew it must be important. In his classic slanted handwriting, my grandfather described one of his more recent cases. His notes were usually brief, more like bullet points than stories, as he typically just said. Heard voices, security cameras were hacked, or mice in the pipes, causing the terrible noises, along with quick descriptions of the events. But this was different. Fortwood Lane should be condemned and left to rot. No one belongs here. It is the work of something I have denied my whole life, but I can no longer deny it now. Many have faked it, but there is no doubt that this is no hoax. I have seen things here, and this place will kill me. I know it. Immediately, I was thrown off balance. This was very uncharacteristic of my grandfather. He was never dramatic, and I had never heard him speak of 19 Fortwood Lane. The date was a little over a month ago, so it must have been recent. I had seen him so often since then, and he never mentioned it. Mrs. Penderson called me and reported a strange figure wandering around at night. She tried to deal with it, but her husband was often away on business, and with a newborn, she had the right to be afraid. Immediately thought of an intruder and was determined to help, as I could only imagine what could happen to a young woman alone, at home at night. I arrived on Friday evening, and she insisted on staying with me and the baby before he asked me for matches. Her husband was on business on the other side of the country, which was confirmed by location services, credible testimonies, photos. I performed my usual checks, but neither a hidden room nor a loose window was to be found. We sat in the bedroom for the night, the baby in her arms, while Mrs. Penderson and I waited. It came every night, as she had told me, so it didn't take long for me to notice something. It began with the soft sound of footsteps pacing the hallway back and forth, as if someone was walking around. They were not the footsteps of a man in boots, but the lighter patter of a woman. Strange, since she had told me it was a man in the house. After a while, the sound stopped and started again, this time coming from the master bath. Mrs. Penderson flinched, and I must admit, I was startled too, as that room was only accessible through the door in the room we were in. How could the footsteps get from the hallway into the bathroom without passing us? "It's starting," she said. Despite the dim light, I could see the fear in her eyes, and the color had drained from her face. I assured her that I would catch the bastard. It was cruel to terrorize a woman like that. "Don't go in there," she said, this time with a tremor in her voice that even the best actors couldn't have faked. "I have never seen it directly. I know something bad will happen if you challenge it. I called you here to prove that I am not crazy, but I don't need you to get rid of it. I will move away. We can leave. To believe me, please, let's go." "I can't say. She didn't warn me. It will be fine, miss. I promise. I just want to take a look at it. Whoever is in there can't hurt me, and you don't have to move. Just let me drive him away." I walked to the bathroom and tore the door open, reached for the light switch. The light switch didn't work. I tried again, but nothing happened. I went back into the bedroom, tried the switch there. I had never seen that before. I had checked, and the circuit for the bathroom also controlled the bedroom. The bastards must have cut the bulb. Without thinking further, I walked into the room. After I took a few steps, I heard Mrs. Penderson scream, and the baby began to cry. Usually fearless in such situations, before matches, I was startled when I felt goosebumps on my back and noticed a slight tremor in my hands. I took a deep breath as I took another step, but was immediately stopped by a rough force. I stumbled back and tried to orient myself in the dark. The moonlight fell through the narrow window above the shower, and I could make out the details of the room. However, there was something standing in the bathtub that hadn't been there. It was a freestanding tub, so it wasn't a shower curtain or anything like that, and there was no overhead light or art on the wall. The figure was that of a man, but taller than any man I had ever seen. It was probably 8 feet tall, but incredibly slender, perhaps even taller. When I saw that it had a top hat on its head, my blood froze in my veins, for I knew this was no trick. The entity began to move toward me, and I tried to scream as it reached for my throat, but no sound came out. Instead, I felt this thing dig its hand into my skin roughly. It was impossible. It had to be impossible. But I could feel the weight of its hands pressing into my throat. I fought and kicked, but it did nothing. I survived only because it let me go, loosened its grip, and slowly walked back to the bathtub before vanishing completely. Stumbled through the door back to Mrs. E. Penderson, grabbed her hand, and told her we had to leave. I didn't look back, didn't care about any belongings. I just knew we had to get away. I had been warned and didn't want to mess with something so powerful. We ran out the door, and I helped her get into my van before we drove off. I don't know what we encountered that night, but I know it released me intentionally. It wants me to tell people what happened that night. I have spent my life convincing people that it doesn't exist. It is only fair that it shows me how real it truly is. And it has killed me. The doctor will say it was cancer, but I was completely healthy before that night. When this thing reached for my throat, I think it infected my whole being and planted some poison in my cells to ensure I know exactly how powerful it is. Arnhem has. The tumor on my neck has strange growths that the doctors have never seen before. I told them I had no idea what it could be, but I know it is the handprint of the thing. The tumor is located exactly where I felt its terrible hand. It left me alive only long enough to understand what it has done and to fuel the fear in me. He asked me for matches, but I refused to talk about it and let my loved ones believe they can do something to save me from it killing me. Matches. Now, I can only try to hide it from them and ensure that no one ever goes into that house again and sees such a hellish creature. If anyone reads this, please know with all my intent and honor that what I experienced that night was real. And believe me when I say that we are not alone in this world. Next true horror story. I never expected to be haunted by a ghost. I guess no one really does. I always thought if something like that happened to me, I would at least have a clue about it. Maybe a red warning flag, like moving into a very old house, disturbing a burial ground, someone cursing me with their dying breath. I got none of that. I mean, I did actually move into a new apartment. Sure, but it wasn't old nor a house. I moved into a new apartment in the city. The building itself had been finished only a month ago, and no one had lived in the apartment before me. I was one of the first people in the entire building. How could I have expected such a new place to be haunted by a ghost? This isn't just a new apartment nervousness thing. I have a bad feeling or things move by themselves. Thing. It is an actual visible ghost or entity or whatever you want to call it. And I saw it the first time I entered my apartment. He asked me for matches. Of course, I had looked at the apartment before, but not the actual unit I would be living in. That might have seemed a bit suspicious, especially now with what I know about this. However, I just thought the property manager didn't want to go all the way up to the 10th floor. The layout of the unit I had viewed was the same anyway, so I didn't worry too much. Matches. So there I stood, carrying my first box into the new apartment. And the first thing I saw when I opened the door to my gloomy, unlit apartment was a shadowy figure cowering in the corner. My first thought was that it was a burglar. Why would someone break into an empty apartment? Hesitantly, I pressed the light switch and saw that it was a little girl, maybe about 10 years old, cowering in the corner and shivering. I was confused for a moment, but then I noticed her clothes, a shirt, and jeans. A normal outfit for a young girl, but terribly dirty and torn. I thought she must be homeless and had hidden in an empty apartment to escape the cold of the coming winter. It was a bit strange how she had gotten past security, but I just shook my head. I approached her, still cowering in the corner and shaking like a leaf in the wind. She had her arms wrapped protectively around her head. I felt terribly sorry for her, and seeing how thin and malnourished she seemed, I thought I might get her something to eat before calling the police. I reached out to touch her still trembling shoulder, intending to give her a gentle shake and show her that I wasn't angry or going to hurt her. However, As I touched her shoulder, I immediately pulled my hand back, surprised by how cold she was. It was as if I were touching a block of dry ice, so cold that it burned. She stopped shivering and began to slowly turn toward me, almost as if she were afraid to look at me. When our eyes met, first her, then me shortly after, her eyes had been roughly scratched out, as if by an animal. The girl ran deeper into the apartment, and I hurried in the other direction, stormed out, and slammed the door behind me. I immediately called the property manager and told him about the strange little girl in my apartment. I didn't mention the eyes, though, for fear he might think I was crazy and ignore me. Besides, it wasn't like he couldn't see it for himself if he came up. However, when he arrived, and we searched the whole place from top to bottom, we couldn't find her. My property manager decided she must have slipped out. Reluctantly, I agreed, although I doubted she could be that agile with her eyes. I hadn't really considered the possibility that she was a ghost. The thought naturally crossed my mind. The idea seemed ridiculous at first. Matches. But when I turned away from the door, after saying goodbye to my property manager, and found her cowering in the corner again, quickly changed my mind. At first, I was a little afraid of her. I mean, who wouldn't be? She was a real ghost. It's kind of hard to be afraid of a ghost that is so afraid itself. And when I say afraid, I mean absolutely terrified, literally all the time. Besides the corner where I first saw her, she has a few other hiding places in the apartment where she randomly appears. Under the shelves in the pantry, behind the shower curtain, in the hall closet. She even started hiding under the bed after I finally set up the bed frame. Matches. That time was a special surprise when she started screaming as soon as I lay down. At first, I thought about moving out, but ultimately I decided against it. Apart from scaring me now and then, she seemed completely harmless. Unless I tried to get her attention or disturb her in some way, she did nothing but sit there and shiver. It didn't really seem like something that justified breaking the lease. It really is a nice apartment, and I would have hated to lose it. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where she came from. I really felt sorry for her. She was so young, and those wounds on her eyes. Her death could not have been an easy one. I thought if I found out more about her, plus, I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little concerned about why she was always so scared. Despite all my efforts, however, I couldn't find any information about her. It was a bit strange, as you would think a death like hers would stand out somehow. Maybe her body was never found. It's hard to say. Anyway, I decided just to leave it at that. I've had worse roommates, so I could learn to live with the minor inconveniences of living in a haunted apartment. I wouldn't have even posted anything if not for, well, the recent developments. I wish I had moved out when I had the chance. A few days ago, a large piece of that white popcorn ceiling fell down, revealing what looked like an attic door. It was made of dark, heavy wood, and had a crusted brass ring as a handle. Matches. It makes no sense for it to be there, of course, considering I live in a building with nothing above me but another apartment. I tried to open it, but it seemed locked or something. If there was a way to unlock it, it must have been on the other side, since I couldn't see a mechanism on my side. I tried to call the property manager. He didn't pick up. I tried to find him in the office on the ground floor. It was completely empty with no sign that anyone had been there for a long time. I even knocked on the door of the apartment directly above me on the 11th floor, but no one answered, no matter how many times I tried. So I assumed it was an unoccupied apartment. Matches. This event made me think about all the other strange things I had noticed about this building. Things I had previously dismissed, but that now looked like neon signs trying to tell me something. You see, I shouldn't be the only person here. But I have never run into any of the other residents. It's not just that. No one I've told about my building has ever heard of this place. I was able to find public records about the building when I looked. But still, the city isn't exactly huge, and new buildings are rare. Matches. I spoke to many people in libraries and such when I was trying to find information about the little girl. At first, I wrote it off as a strange coincidence. But seriously, how can that be? Still, I didn't feel like I had to leave. Besides, since my property manager had seemingly disappeared, I couldn't get to the paperwork to move out properly anyway. It was only today that I realized I hadn't seen the girl for a single moment since the attic door appeared, but by then it was far too late. I woke up to the attic door, shaking like crazy, asked me for matches, handle banging against the wood again and again, like a desperate victim trying to escape. I peeked out of my bedroom just once, but I didn't look for long. The moment I stuck my head out the door, the shaking stopped, and I heard the distinct sound of a latch being unlocked. Matches. I don't know why, but I immediately had the vague feeling that I didn't want to see what was coming through there. I quickly slammed my bedroom door and locked it, shoving a few shelves in front of it to barricade it makeshift style. I wish I had made the jump for the front door back then, but now it's too late. Who knows if I would have even made it out? Open shortly after setting up the last shelf. Since then, I haven't heard anything. Not a single sound, either inside or outside the apartment. No car horn, no bird call, or even the wind. Just silence. It's been hours now. Hear anything. Just complete, dead silence. Matches. My bedroom doesn't even have a single window, so I have no way to check what's going on outside. I tried to call for help, but I can't get a cell signal. Strangely, I have Wi-Fi, but no one has responded to my emails, not friends, nor family members, my property manager, or anyone else. It's weird. As I write this, I realize I have no idea what my property manager looks like. I've stood across from him and spoken to him several times. Maybe he never existed. Who knows? Matches. I think I'll probably try to escape. I could try to wait it out, but I have no guarantee it will ever end. When I think back to the skinny figure of the poor little girl's ghost, I wonder how long she must have waited. I want to at least try before I lose all my strength. That way I feel like I have a slightly better chance. I know if anyone will even read this, but if this post somehow actually gets published, can someone please do me a favor? Me for matches. If anyone posts here that their apartment is haunted by the ghost of a woman whose eyes have been scratched out, please tell them to get away as fast as possible while they still can. Next true horror story. There is a legend in my state about a woman who lived alone in the woods with her 2 children. People disagree on what happened to her husband. Some say he died, Others claim he left her for another woman or was in the war. Which war exactly is uncertain. People seem to agree on only one point. The story is old. The legend goes that one winter, a stranger knocked on the woman's door. He asked her for a meal and a place to warm up for a while. Her children were asleep, and she was sitting alone by the fire. She was grateful for the company. The stranger stayed for several hours and spoke with the woman. When the sun rose, he prepared to leave. He asked her if she wanted money in return for her hospitality, matches. She said she could use it well, and he told her to dig under a certain tree in her garden. There she would find money he had buried. She went out with a shovel and began to dig, asked me for matches. But as soon as the shovel touched the ground, she heard one of her children scream in pain. Matches. She dropped the shovel and went back into the house to check on her children. They were still fast asleep, so she went back out and continued digging. But every time the shovel touched the ground, matches. She was tormented by the sound of her screaming children. She forced herself to ignore it and kept digging until the screams finally stopped. But she did not find the promised money. Cursing, she went back into the house, and this time it was her scream that broke the silence. Her children had been murdered in their beds. She ran to a nearby farm to seek help, but the farmer noticed that she was not only covered in blood, but also carrying the shovel she had been digging with. She was arrested, found guilty of murder, and sentenced to hang. Unfortunately, the rope was tied incorrectly, and as she fell from the platform, her head was severed from her body. The legend says that all this happened in an area that is now a national park. If you go hiking in the park, look out for a woman in rags. If she approaches you and asks for money, give it to her immediately, because if you have no money, she will kill you. It was common for people to take money with them when they went into the park. I never paid much attention to the legend. Personally, it made no sense to me. What were the stranger's motives? Why did he test her? Matches. She was a single woman with 2 children at a time when life was certainly very hard. He dangled money in front of her nose and then punished her when she reached for it. Sure, lesson in there somewhere, but I'm not sure what it is. Besides, I wasn't the type to let a silly story stop me from going somewhere. The park was huge, with miles of trails. It was beautiful to look at, and I loved watching the seasons change. I often went hiking alone, enjoying the solitude. I admit I took money with me, but after a while, the absurdity of the story began to annoy me, and I stopped taking money. Then came the day when my belief and my composure were put to the test. I was out alone as usual. That day it was quiet, except for the patter of trees shedding rainwater and the occasional, persistent tapping of a woodpecker. I was on one of the longer trails, maybe 3/4 of the way through the park, when I saw a figure on the path ahead of me. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, I couldn't be the only person who liked hiking in the rain. But as I got closer, I noticed something was wrong. It was a woman, but the strange thing was that from a distance, it looked like she was wearing a long dress. You couldn't tell what color it originally was, because it was so dirty. I immediately remembered the legend, shot through my head. First, someone is playing the character from the story to scare people and maybe earn a few coins. Second, I was in big trouble if it wasn't a prank. When you hear this, it might seem obvious to just turn around and run away, to give this person no opportunity to get closer. He asked me for matches, but when you are actually in such a situation where you feel a touch of fear, like in a scene from a horror movie, you hope for as long as possible that nothing unusual is happening. Supernatural things don't really happen, after all. He asked me for matches, certainly not to oneself. I walked carefully in the middle of the path, taking slow, deliberate steps. I got so close to her that I had to walk around her to avoid running directly into her. That's when I noticed I heard her mumbling, not really speaking, but quietly talking incoherently to herself. In that moment, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I began to shake and sweat. The world around me seemed to shrink until it consisted only of me and this stiff, pale creature that still separated us. "Do you have money?" The voice made my blood freeze. This was the only time I had gone into the park without money. My insides felt like lava, as if they were burning through my stomach and pouring onto the muddy ground. I desperately tried to think of what to do when I heard the tapping of a woodpecker again. For half a moment, I felt relieved, grounded by the reminder that there was another living creature nearby. But my relief vanished immediately. The sound didn't come from a woodpecker. It came from her. Her lower jaw moved up and down, and her teeth clattered together to create this tapping sound. I opened my mouth to answer, but no sound came out. She moved stiffly and awkwardly toward me, her dead eyes fixing on mine. She repeated, this time more hostile, a hand raised, ready to grab me. Without thinking, I stuttered, "I have money, but I know where some is buried." She paused and waited. "Therese," I pointed to the left toward a path that led to the highest point of the park. She turned and began walking through the undergrowth, still with her clattering jaw and confused mumbling. I didn't wait. As soon as she veered off the path, I ran. I didn't want to find out how much time I had until she realized I had lied. I didn't know if she would chase me, and if so, how fast or how far. Several times I almost stumbled and fell flat, but I am pretty nimble on my feet, and managed to get to the edge of the forest without incident. I found myself on a grassy rise that led down into a hayfield. A path led around the hayfield, close to a creek, and then went up another hill to the parking lot. I was almost safe. I ran down the first hill so fast that I almost fell. Asked me for matches. Just before the bottom I heard it. The clattering of teeth coming from the edge of the woods. I shouldn't have looked. Anyway, at first I saw nothing. Then I noticed something that looked like a small black dog, maybe a Pomeranian, rolling across the ground and tumbling down the hill. After a few meters, I realized it wasn't a dog. It was her severed head rolling. I ran faster than ever before in my life, probably faster than I ever will run again. For matches, I jumped over the small wooden bridge that spanned the creek and stormed up the next hill so hurriedly that I clawed into the pebbles until my knuckles bled, all just to gain more speed. I reached my car and was shaking so hard that I dropped the keys almost twice before finally getting them into the ignition. I raced out of the parking lot so recklessly that I might have run over a deer without realizing it while driving away. I compulsively looked in the rearview mirror because I expected to see a mass of black hair rolling after me. There was nothing. Once home, matches. I locked and chained the door and went through the house to make sure all windows were closed and locked. He asked me for matches. I was afraid to look out the windows and terrified at the thought of hearing anything that sounded even remotely like clattering teeth. Sleepless nights passed. I waited. I am still waiting. So far, nothing has happened, and I can't really explain why. Is she confined to the park? Did I hallucinate? Was it just a prank after all? I haven't been back to the park since, and I strongly doubt I will ever return. I don't even drive past it anymore. I take a detour just to not even come close to that place, and I make sure I always have money with me when I leave the house. Next true horror story. I suffered from insomnia during my youth. This could be due to the depression that accompanied the bullying at my school. It could also have been due to the hours-long video game sessions I used to cope with the bullying. After about 6 or 7 hours in front of the screen, my corneas felt like they were completely dried out. My problems with the outside world disappeared while I played. As soon as I turned off the console, red, rimmed eyes stared back at me in the mirror. Then began the long journey back to my room upstairs, trying to hide my nighttime gaming from my parents. Matches. The partially above ground basement, where the living room with the TV was located, was always a place of freedom for me, or at least what freedom meant for a relatively innocent teenager. Sleepovers with friends, nights full of video games, the promise of sneaking out the side door one day to do adult things when I was older. I had begged my parents for years to let me move into the unused guest room in the basement. They stubbornly refused, convinced that I wouldn't get any sleep there, even though I hardly slept anyway. But when I turned 13, they finally gave in. I enjoyed the privacy and freedom of my new room, but the more time I spent there, the more I noticed it was a dark and unsettling place. The living room had no window. Matches. If I had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I relied on the moonlight falling down the stairs through the back door for matches, or I had to fumble through the darkness to reach the light switch on the opposite wall. I usually chose the former, but the 3-meter sprint from my room to the bathroom was always frightening. I often imagined someone watching me through the window, or a figure with its head bent back and mouth wide open, possibly sharp carnivorous teeth, descending the moonlit stairs with no lock on my door. Where was I to seek protection if such a monster actually came down those stairs? The darker areas of the basement were even more terrifying. The side door, once a symbol of rebellion, sex, and alcohol for me, instead became a symbol for potential break-ins and assaults. Matches. Someone could have easily slipped through it and hidden in the pitch-black living room. But the main reason for my increasingly sleepless nights was the knocking sounds coming from the walls. Always there, just every few days. He asked me for matches. The knocking began at the other end of the opposite wall, near the closet under the stairs. It was quickly answered on the opposite side of the wall, before it hopped systematically but not rhythmically to the other side of the room, finally ceiling above my bed. After 3 or 4 rounds in the room, it stopped. The sound itself was unsettling, but the inexplicable feeling of terror that accompanied it really got to me. All other sounds seemed to be muffled or swallowed before the knocking began. No humming of electricity. He asked me for matches. No creaking of the house under its own weight. Everything went silent in the seconds before the knocking, as if the room itself was holding its breath. With every knock, I got goosebumps, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Even after the knocking stopped, the feeling of cold and unease remained. Every sound I wanted to make seemed too loud. Every sound I made felt like a disturbance. How long could this go on? Such questions shot through my head every night as my already unusual sleep rhythm became increasingly untenable. I told my parents about the noises despite my insistence that the knocking movement couldn't come from a pest or rodent, that they were controlled thuds and not the scratching or scuttling of tiny claws on drywall. My parents called an exterminator, but neither squirrels nor rats were found in the walls. No trace that any had ever been there. My complaints about the knocking noises were soon dismissed as the product of an overactive imagination. One night in February, it came to a head. I went to bed relatively early, too tired to do much. While looking through the tiny window of my room at the Forno, I felt a stronger unease in my chest than usual. It soon grew into a physical sensation that fed on my restlessness. The knocking began on the opposite wall. I jerked upright and quickly turned on the lamp on my nightstand. My ears rang despite the silence, and my heart pounded against my sternum. I waited for the loud bang above my headboard or for the room itself to collapse. Anything. The birds began to sing in my garden, even though it was still dark. I mined my phone and prayed that the first rays of sun would soon be visible. It was 300 a.m. High melodies of the birds twisted into something eerie. As the chirping reached a crescendo, in my ears turned into a dissonant tone. Suddenly, a violent banging echoed against my door, so powerful that the wall shook. It was uncontrolled, angry blows, like those of a 150-kilo man crashing against it. But whatever it wasn't human. My attacker would have entered long ago if it had been. There was no lock on my door. Yea, I had no time to imagine what kind of monstrosity was on the other side. I had to act, but couldn't think about what to do. So I did what all frightened children do. I threw myself at the light switch above me, which was conveniently right next to the door. The moment my finger touched the ice, cold plastic switch, I realized how close I was to the entity behind the door, only a few inches away. I was already imagining my own death when the lights flickered. The banging continued for a few more seconds. The birds stopped singing, but the silence gave me no courage. Footsteps that could break the silence were absent. That meant to me that whatever was outside was still lurking behind the door. He asked me for matches. I placed my ear as gently as possible against the door to hear what was outside without being heard myself. But there was nothing to hear. After a few minutes of standing rooted to the spot trembling, I tore the door open and instinctively ran to the light switch of the TV room. Looking back, I see how stupid that decision could have been if someone had actually been on the other side of the door. I guess my teenage brain had accepted the risk and absurdity of the situation. With the light on, I saw nothing unusual in the room. I checked the side and back walls and outside. Only the cold night air and falling snow were visible. My pulse slowed a little, but my nerves remained tense. With no other option, I went back to my room. I lay in bed, but only closed my eyes when dawn finally came. The next morning, I searched my garden and the garage, unsure of what I hoped to find. Maybe tracks in the snow leading from the back or side door. Maybe a comment from my parents about the noise last night. There was nothing. This result was actually more disturbing to me than finding tangible evidence. During the rest of the time I lived in that house, There was no more knocking in the walls. I still know that I was awake and fully conscious when the events of that night took place, yet I have no explanation for what happened. Next true horror story. Shan lived on the wild side. Every "no trespassing" sign was just an open invitation to find out what people were hiding. He was a born explorer, always ready for the next adventure. His best friend Luke was adventurous, but certainly had his limits. There were places Shan wanted to explore that Luke had declined. There was adventure, and then there was just plain stupid. The pandemic had affected them in different ways, while it made Luke more cautious. For Shan it seemed only to lead to more boredom and a desire to have fun. But that wasn't all it did. Luke was a non-essential worker. He was short on cash, which led to a problem. It was Shan's birthday, and he had no money to buy his best friend a gift. Luckily, what Shan really wanted didn't cost a dime. Unfortunately for Luke, it was pure recklessness. Wanted to break in and explore the now abandoned Lady Gertrude's asylum. It was considered one of the most haunted places in America and was only one town over from where they lived. Shan had wanted to go there for years, but Luke had always refused. Now Shan begged him to come along on his birthday. Reluctantly agreed. Good idea, but what was he to do? He didn't want to disappoint Shan. On the night of Shan's birthday, set off for the dilapidated building. On the way, Shan raved about the legends. They say the head doctor, Dr. Myers, performed botched lobotomies that killed dozens of people. They say you can still see the doctor in his office, sorting through his papers and patients. It is said that their ghosts roam the halls of the asylum, forever lost. The conditions were terrible. The death toll from preventable diseases was astronomical, exclaimed Shan. Luke didn't find that nearly as exciting as Shan apparently did. Honestly, the legends just made him sad. Still, it was Shan's birthday, so he put on a smile. The huge building slowly loomed before them, definitely looking eerie. Parts of the building seemed to be falling apart. Graffiti warned of death for all who entered. The front door was chained shut. Shan had brought bolt cutters for that. They turned off the car and walked up the dilapidated steps. The chain, and lazily threw the bolt cutters aside as they pushed the door open. The smell of dirt and decay hit their noses, sending them into a coughing fit. When they settled down, their flashlights to see through the pitch black hallways. The place was eerie. The overturned wheelchairs and old medical equipment covered in cobwebs. Luke had no desire to touch anything. Shan, on the other hand, opened doors and explored every crevice he could find. Shan walked into one of the rooms when the door closed behind him, and Luke began to panic. "Shan, can you hear me?" he called as he tried to open the door, but it was jammed. "I'm okay," he heard Shan's voice. "Wow, that scared me," he said, as if it were the most exciting thing that had ever happened. "There's another door on the other side of the room. It probably leads to another hallway. Just meet me in Dr. Myers' office. That's the room with the big double doors on the 3rd floor. It shouldn't be hard to find." Luke wanted to refuse, but he feared he had no other choice. If they couldn't get that door open, they had to keep trying alone. Luke made his way slowly through the hallways, looking for stairs. He asked me for matches. It felt like he had been walking forever when he heard a shuffling sound coming from the corner. His blood froze, and he began to shake, causing the light of his flashlight to swing back and forth. He took a deep breath and walked quickly toward the sound. He let out a scream when he ran into a girl about his age. She screamed too, and then placed a hand on her chest, as if to calm her pounding heart. "Huge scare?" she exclaimed. "You gave me a huge scare," he replied. They both calmed down for a moment before Luke asked her, "What are you doing here?" "I got lost," she said. "I was out with my friends when I took a wrong turn, and now I can't find them anymore." "Luke," he replied, "I'm supposed to meet a friend on the 3rd floor. I have no idea where the stairs are." Lexi gave him a small smile. "Well, I can help you with that. I just came from the 4th floor. I'll show you the stairs if I can stay with you. This place scares me. I don't want to be alone," she said. Luke agreed, secretly glad to have someone with him as he moved through the asylum. They made their way. "You don't look like you really want to be here," said Lexi to start a conversation. "I don't," replied Luke. "Well, we're in the same boat, because neither of us wants to be here," she said. She turned a corner and brought him to a staircase. "This way. The floors are numbered, so you shouldn't have any trouble finding the 3rd floor." "Aren't you coming?" he asked. She shook her head. "I'm going to try to find the exit. I have people waiting for me." "It was nice meeting you," she said with a friendly smile. "Same," he said as he stepped into the stairwell, while Lexi turned and walked toward the exit, reached the 3rd floor, and immediately found the double doors, marked Daga, Maya's office. He had another small scare when he almost ran into Shan as he opened the doors and entered. He felt relieved when Shan looked up and smiled. "Was there paranormal activity?" "Shan looked hopeful," replied Luke. "Damn, me neither. I guess this place is a bust. I did find some old records about the patients," he said. Luke followed Shan behind a large desk when an old picture on the wall caught his attention. It showed who he assumed was Dr. Myers, with over 100 patients whose names were listed at the bottom of the photo. It was at least 50 years old. Sad faces when one made him pause in shock. He counted to the 4th row, 36, from the left. He knew that face. He looked at the name listed at the bottom of the photo, Alexis Young. He went cold. Lexi had been lost for longer than he realized. Next true horror story. More than a decade ago, I worked as a security guard at the Dade City Business Center in Florida. It was essentially a cluster of different facilities in a single plaza, and it was quite a busy place during the day. As part of the security team, we constantly had to check the workers and trucks from the various companies coming and going. There were 3 main positions: the check-in station, the rover patrol, and the foot patrol in the warehouse. I had the pleasure of taking all 3 positions from time to time, but mostly I was responsible for the foot patrol on Friday evenings from 5:00 p.m. to 5:00 a.m. My job was to check all the doors to the storage rooms in the back area of the plaza. The rover patrol couldn't cover these areas because they were inaccessible to vehicles. Most of these areas were shut down or abandoned, so the security guard had to walk through a neglected alley in total darkness and hope not to get into trouble. Matches. I was being paid minimum wage at the time, so I didn't want to put in more effort than necessary. At the back end of the plaza ran functioning train tracks, and occasionally a train horn would sound and race by. Matches, snapping us security guards out of our dull autopilot mode and bringing us back to reality. Then take turns cursing the train and making each other laugh over the radios. We also started talking about the creepy sightings around the tracks. There were reports from Informatchersby in the plaza who sometimes saw a young girl in a white dress either walking or floating down the tracks, always toward the nearby cemetery. She never reacted to anything shouted at her. There weren't many security cameras in the abandoned area of the site where most of these sightings took place. So to my knowledge, she was never caught on film. My supervisors, who had trained me, swore by these stories. Real hard, working guys without any humor. Matches. Both the business center and the city of Dade City itself have a reputation for being connected to supernatural events. A lot of history about the town that is easy to find with a simple Google search. I won't go into detail now, but keep in mind that most history doesn't really reflect the good side of humanity. Before having set the mood, let me now come to one of the most frightening experiences I had there. 2007. As usual, I was working the foot patrol. 12 long, exhausting hours of walking around and checking doors. Honestly, not much to it, but at least all that walking was good for my figure. In my time there, I had already experienced my share of strange occurrences, the feeling of being watched, the sudden cold that appeared for no apparent reason. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but after a while, things became routine, for lack of a better word, and the wow factor wore off. Midnight, when my routine led me to the aluminum plant. Unlike the other storage rooms, securing this structure involved a bit more than just checking doors. Matches. There were various machines running in the back of the warehouse. Part of my duties included checking some of the displays on the consoles and ensuring the numbers were within a certain range. If they weren't, I had to make calls to have those consoles checked. To get there, 4 matches. You had to climb a metal staircase to the second floor, which led to a walkway where you could check the numbers. For matches. Right after the last console, there was another staircase you could go down to get back to the ground floor. Walked past the console, lost in thought, taking only a quick glance at each display without any enthusiasm, being so absorbed in my routine. When I reached the end of the walkway, before I was about to go down the stairs, when I paused for a moment, I got the feeling of being watched and turned around to see if anyone was behind me. To say someone was standing there would be an understatement. Matches. The first thing that went through my mind was that someone had simply appeared there suddenly. A woman in a white nightgown stood about 3 meters away, staring directly at me. Yes, machines were running, but even if you move slowly and carefully through that walkway, it is almost impossible not to make any noise. Matches. I heard not a single sound suggesting someone was there. I remained completely still for a few heartbeats. There was hardly any light up on the walkway. The glow of the display screens. I could make out her silhouette and part of her face. The shadow cast by her hair prevented me from seeing her eyes. My flashlight was on my belt, but the idea of grabbing it, lifting it, and turning it on seemed far too overwhelming in that moment. I don't know if the woman came closer, but I definitely felt that she was approaching me. Before he asked me for matches, I was just about to say something when the woman raised her left hand and grabbed the left side of her face under her hair. Matches. She slowly tilted her head to the side and then lifted it straight off her neck. This was no optical illusion due to the darkness. it was no trick, asked me for matches. I saw her arm stretch and lift the woman's head straight off her body. I ran down the stairs and stormed out of the building. I didn't scream or anything like that. I just ran. I kept running until I reached the other end of the plaza, and only then did I stop to catch my breath. I leaned against the wall in the darkness and tried to process what had just happened. The whole encounter lasted maybe only 15 seconds, and part of my brain tried to dismiss it as a prank. The more I tried to rationalize it, the more I began to panic. Besides me and the other security guards in that building at that time of night, there was no reason why I would have gone back in there that night. I continued my shift, feeling incredibly vulnerable, as if I were being hunted. I made up a stupid excuse about a family emergency and went home early. I think my terrified expression helped make my story believable to my supervisors. I told no one what I had seen, neither my closest friends nor my colleagues. I was afraid they might think I was crazy or lying. I returned to work after a while and went back to the routine. I never saw the mysterious figure again. In 2010, the year after I left, a fire broke out in a citrus processing factory in the center, and almost the entire factory burned down. Remember how I said the train tracks run through the whole plaza? I forgot to mention that there was no safety bar that came down when the trains ran at full speed. In June 2016, a train crashed into a semi-truck crossing the tracks at the wrong time. I'm sure these incidents are not related, but it does make one wonder. Next true horror story. In 2014, I was going through a phase of depression caused by my mother's diagnosis with stage 3 breast cancer. I became a very quiet student in high school and had no friends to help me through this difficult time. I started drawing graffiti and befriended other people from that community. The more I immersed myself in this lifestyle, reckless I became regarding my own well-being. I live in New York, and almost every graffiti artist in the state knows the old abandoned Kings Park Psychiatric Center. The place was closed in 1997 and has been decaying ever since. Naturally, it has a reputation for being haunted. After World War II, many soldiers suffering from PTSD were dumped here. At that time, certain mental illnesses were not well understood, so patients were subjected to outdated practices like lobotomies and electroshock therapy. Matches. I had been to the asylum many times without any problems. Sure, sometimes you run into homeless people, stoners. He asked me for matches, and other students who are there to finish their photography class. But I never experienced anything supernatural. But that was about to change. The last time I was there, a few friends of mine and I were bored one day. So we decided to visit the hospital just to hang out and maybe leave a few tags. We sneaked into the building through a hole in the wire fence and then entered through a broken window. Once inside, we weren't too sure the place was completely empty, but we saw no other cars in the parking lot, and there were no sounds from inside. The place was as quiet as a grave. We browsed all floors of the building, and nothing unusual happened until we decided to use our cell phones as flashlights. We needed a light source. My phone was fully charged before the trip. We walked down a hallway, and I approached an open door that led into a separate room. As I got closer, felt strange. They say that when something terrible happens, negative energy lingers in that exact spot forever. I tried to dismiss it. Matches, as I was never a believer in the paranormal, and completely denied the existence of ghosts or spiritual beings. I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of my friends. We walked past the door, and suddenly a feeling of sadness overcame us, as if we were all suddenly at a child's funeral. Soon the sadness disappeared and gave way to a stronger feeling, a feeling of absolute fear, as if we had entered dangerous territory. Suddenly my phone turned off and was now completely dead, not responding to my desperate attempts to restart it. My phone was getting pretty old, and I desperately needed an upgrade. So I just blamed the weird feeling I had on paranoia. My phone was just old and not working properly. When we were about halfway up the stairs, suddenly all the phones in the group died simultaneously without warning. But strangely, no one seemed concerned about it. We finally reached the top floor, and when we started the trip, had the idea of taking a photo of myself sitting on the roof edge, legs dangling, with a freshly painted graffiti behind me. This was nothing new to me, as I was a big roof climber and felt very comfortable exploring the rooftops of New York City. But since all our phones were dead, I was pretty disappointed. We went back down the stairs until we were back on the ground floor. As we all moved toward the exit, slam behind us. Startled, we all ran down the hallway in total darkness. While we ran, several doors slammed behind us. Verige asked me for matches, that we had just checked rooms 20 minutes earlier, and no one was there. We kept running and jumped over fallen debris and puddles until we got to the room with the broken window. The room was very small, about 5 by 5 meters, with a high ceiling and a rusty, heavy steel door opposite the window. This room might have been used for solitary confinement when the hospital was still in operation. We were all in panic as we lined up behind the window. Of course, the chubby kid in the group stood in front of me. When it was his turn, he had trouble getting through the window, and my heart raced. I turned around to see the last friend in line, standing right behind me. He had a blank stare on his face. His pupils were dilated, and the color had drained from his skin. "What is wrong with you? You look like you just lost everything." I was interrupted by the loud bang of the massive steel door. Can't even remember opening it. I remember trying to open this steel door on one of my previous visits, and it was impossible. The guy in front of me finally managed to get through the window, and now it was my turn, since I was smaller. Before I got through the window without any problems, the rest of the group was already on their way out of the building. I turned around one more time to see my friend still staring blankly out the window. The expression on his face haunts me to this day. "Hey, what are you doing?" "Get out as fast as possible!" My friend woke from his trance and then climbed through the window. "Thanks for waiting for us, you stupid idiots." As we drove home, asked me for matches. Most of my friends were already laughing about what had happened, while my friend and I sat in total silence in the back seat. Before that night, I never really believed in ghosts or the afterlife. Matches. This experience opened my eyes. You can never really know until it happens to you. I couldn't sleep all night. My parents, and the next morning both my parents, said they had nightmares about me disappearing, which was a strange coincidence that can't just be dismissed. My lesson from this experience is that you should never gamble with your life for Instagram clout or online attention. If you are ever on Long Island, do not enter the Kings Park Psychiatric Center. There is something in its foundation, restless and evil. Next true horror story. These two experiences happened within a month. The first one happened to my brother-in-law. The second I witnessed myself. In 2007, my sister and her husband lived with me and my mother. I was in middle school at the time. On a Saturday night, my brother-in-law was working his security job with my mother at a church event. These services usually lasted until about 8:00 or 8:30 p.m., so we didn't get home until around 9:00 p.m. That evening, parking spot in front of the mobile home, usually my brother-in-law waited inside for us, but this time he was standing outside alone, looking as if he had seen a ghost. As we pulled into the parking spot, I noticed that all the lights in the house were off. He raised his hand, pointed at the house, and said with a trembling voice, "I'm not going in there alone." We asked him what happened, and he told us the following. He asked me for matches. I came home and walked through the parking lot. Just as I was about to go into the house, people talking and laughing inside, I heard the clinking of cutlery and dishes, as if some kind of dinner party was taking place. But all the lights were off. I thought you were playing a prank on me or something. So I went up the stairs and pulled out my house key. The whole time I heard this muffled chatter, laughter, and even music. But as soon as I put the key in the door lock, I heard someone say "shh," and then the whole house went silent. Everything stopped abruptly. When I opened the door, I heard a stomping sound, as if a horde of people were running in the opposite direction. I thought maybe it wasn't a prank after all, but that people had broken into the house and were now trying to run away before they got caught. So I ran around the house to the back door to intercept them. But when I got there, everything was quiet. I thought maybe they hadn't tried to run out because they knew I was outside. So I ran back to the front door, opened it, and stormed into the house. It was quiet and pitch black. I turned on all the lights and searched the entire house. Not a single thing was out of place. There was no sign whatsoever that anyone had been there. That's when I went out and waited for you. The second event occurred a month later in the same house. My mother was out somewhere. I don't remember where. My sister and her husband were on a date. Halo 3 had just come out. My brother-in-law had his Xbox in his room. Before he left that evening, I begged him to let me play the game while he was gone, and reluctantly he agreed. So I had the whole house to myself. I turned on all the lights in the house for obvious reasons, matches, but since I wanted to enjoy the full atmosphere of the video game, I turned off the light in my brother-in-law's room. The only light came from the TV. While I was playing, I felt someone moving in the house. In a mobile home, you notice every movement. I paused the game and waited to hear something. After a few moments of silence, I decided to say something. "Hello." No answer. I continued playing and ignored the sound. A few minutes later, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow glide under the door. I paused the game again and looked directly at the door. The shadow moved out of my field of view. At first, I thought someone had come home early, so I called out again, but I got no answer. Now I was slowly getting scared. I sat in the dark room, trying to hear anything in the house. Suddenly, I heard the refrigerator door being opened. Everyone knows that sound. I stood up and opened the door. I looked to the left where the kitchen was. The refrigerator door was closed, but the light in the kitchen was now off. In fact, hikos, all the lights on the left side of the house were off. Slowly, I began to panic because I thought a burglar was in the house. I walked quietly into the living room, keeping my eyes on the dark dining room. Then I turned on the TV and turned the volume up as loud as it would go. I turned on the light in the kitchen, which illuminated the dining room a little, and then quickly the light in the dining room. I jumped into the middle of the room and screamed, hoping to scare someone who might be there, but no one was there. I ran through the whole house as fast as I could, slamming doors open and screaming as I did, but no one was in the house except me. All doors and windows were closed and locked. If someone had opened the refrigerator, they wouldn't have had time to leave the house. Without me seeing it, I went back to my brother-in-law's room, locked the door, and turned the TV up as loud as I could. I played Halo 3 until my mother came home. I know that our landlord's parents both died of old age in that house. Matches. The kitchen and dining room were the places where most of the activity took place. Before these events, matches, I didn't really believe in ghosts or demonic entities. But the power of such experiences convinces you. Next true horror story. I want to tell a story from my childhood. I was never susceptible to the paranormal, but there was an encounter in my life that left a lasting impression on me. I am originally from a small town in northern New Hampshire, not far from the Canadian border. After my grandmother died in 1996, we moved into her house on the other end of town. I had never met my grandmother because of the complicated relationship between her and my father. Into more detail on that later. The house was an old 2-story building that resembled a Victorian house. However, it had a strange appearance, as if 2 houses had been built very close together and someone had decided at some point to make them into one unit. Many of the bedrooms on the upper floor had sharply sloped ceilings due to this odd architecture. Pizza slices. The master bedroom was on the ground floor, and that's where my parents slept. I was told I had to choose one of the rooms on the upper floor. As mentioned, most of them looked like pizza slices. He asked me for matches. However, there was one on the opposite side of the hallway that looked normal, so I chose that room. The first 2 months were uneventful, but that was about to change one night. I remember it was storming outside, and I was having trouble falling asleep. I constantly had an itch on my neck, and my throat felt like it was burning. At first, I thought I was getting sick. I was just about to get up to get a glass of water when I saw someone standing in the doorway, aged man staring at me with a piercing gaze. I had no idea who he was. Matches. I thought someone had broken into the house. I tried to scream, but the feeling in my throat made it impossible. The stranger kept staring at me before turning around. A flash of lightning outside illuminated the bedroom for a moment, and what I saw in the light terrified me deeply. The back of the man's head was missing. There was just a huge hole where his brain should be, with pieces of flesh hanging down. I was maybe 7 years old at the time and had never seen what the inside of a human skull looked like before. The man disappeared, and I jumped out of bed, and ran out of the bedroom. I stormed into my parents' room and woke them up. After my mother calmed me down, I told her what I had seen. Matches. I remember my mother and father looking at each other with concern, but saying nothing about it. They didn't even try to convince me it had just been a nightmare. They told me I could sleep in their room for the rest of the night. The next day, my father moved all my things into one of the other rooms. I stood in the hallway and watched as he hammered boards over the door of my old room. When I asked him why, he said, "Son, matches. I'm going to tell you the truth, and you have to be a man and deal with it. Grandfather was an evil, cruel bastard who hated life so much that he ended it. That is the one you saw last night, and I think he chose this room to do it. Matches, so it's not a good idea for you or anyone else to ever enter this room again." And that was the end of it. Pizza slice. Rooms until I went to college in 2009. Later, I learned that my grandfather was a violent alcoholic who eventually took his own life with a double-barreled shotgun. He asked me for matches. My father explained to me that my grandmother had refused to do anything about my grandfather's abusive behavior. When I say abusive, I mean it went beyond physical violence. My grandmother even blamed my father for his suicide. That explains why the relationship between her and my father was so strained. It was a really sick situation. My father was no longer living in that house when it happened, so he didn't know exactly which room my grandfather had chosen for it. But after what I saw that night, that was confirmation enough for him. I wondered why he had moved back at all. Apparently, matches. There were financial difficulties in our family that forced us to move into that house after my grandmother's death. Otherwise, my father would never have thought of returning there. We moved out of the house shortly after I left for college. My father sold the property to a developer on the condition that the house be demolished. I think a hotel was built there. Looking back, I am grateful that my father told me the truth from the start. Who it was I saw that night somehow helped me cope better. For my 7-year-old self, it just made sense. After the room was boarded up, I never saw my grandfather's ghost again, and now that the house is completely destroyed, I hope he is in hell where he belongs.